In this video, we're going to show you how to install a CV axle on your Ford Explorer, located on the driver's side rear wheel. Using a 19mm socket, loosen and remove the lug nuts. Once you have the lug nuts removed, grab the wheel, remove it, and set it aside. Remove our upper portion of the sway bar end link. We're going to use a 17mm thin wall wrench to hold the back side here. On the nut, we're going to use a 15mm. Loosen and remove the nut. On the back side of our brake caliper unit here, we have a brake caliper bracket. We're going to go ahead and loosen and remove the two 15mm bolts. There's one on the bottom here, one on the top. And we're going to remove the caliper bracket as well as the caliper with the pads all as one. Pull this bolt out here. We'll do the same for the upper. Now when you remove the caliper and the bracket, you want to be careful. If your brake rotor does not have the set screw holding the rotor to the hub, the rotor will be loose and you don't want to drop that on your foot. So just be careful when removing this. And we're going to use our support tool here to hold the caliper and the bracket up and out of the way. Remove the brake rotor, set that aside. Using a 32mm socket, we're going to get loosen and remove our axle nut. Go ahead and set that aside. Remove your ABS sensor from the knuckle itself. We're going to use an 8mm socket, loosen and remove the bolt holding that. Remove the bolt, set that aside. We're going to wiggle our sensor around a little bit and pull this out. And we're going to pull it out of the retainers here. Don't pull the wire, but grab the rubber grommet, pluck that down. You can do the same on the second one here on the bottom side of the upper control arm. We're going to remove the lower bolt here, 18mm wrench on the bolt head, 21mm on the nut. I'm going to thread our nut on a little bit here. Give that a few taps. Using an 18mm swivel socket and our 21mm wrench, just got to loosen and remove this bolt here. Using a 23mm socket on the nut and a 21mm on the wrench. Let's go ahead, loosen and remove this. Now before we completely remove this bolt here from the upper portion of the knuckle, we want to make sure that our axle is free from the splines inside the hub itself. Now you want to go ahead and try and push on this. It's not moving at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an air hammer here and just tap on the inside here just to loosen up the splines. Now we're going to put a jack underneath here and gently lift up on this. And what you're trying to do is get this right to the sweet spot where this bolt wants to pop out. Now I'm just going to use our punch here. Let's go ahead and we're going to go ahead and lower the jack down a little bit. Using an 18mm socket here on the bottom of the shock, loosen and remove this. lower our jack a little bit more. Using a 21mm socket, we just want to loosen the lower bolt here so we can pivot our knuckle. And this should allow us to pivot this. We're going to work our axle out. Now, right where the axle goes into the rear differential, there's a bracket here. We can go ahead. We're going to put our pry bar in there. We're just going to gently give that a jolt. And that'll pop the axle out. Now, we do have a catch can underneath to catch any fluid. With that free right there, I'm going to go ahead to the outside. I'll slowly remove that so you can see that come out. I'm going to grab the entire axle and just gently pull that out. Right here on the differential, there is an axle seal. You want to go ahead, wipe that down. You want to do a visual inspection as well as feel the seal. You want to run your finger on there, see if there's any burrs, any tears, anything like that. That could be causing any issues or potential leak. If it is leaking, you definitely want to go ahead and replace that seal at this time. Go ahead and feed the axle up into place. Feed that in, you're going to feel the splines slide in and just give that axle a good little jolt, pushing that back in. You want to come out here and inspect it, make sure that it's seated the way it was before, and ours is seated. Let's go back out to the outside and install the axle back into the knuckle. I'm going to put some grease on the splines here of our CV axle. And what we'll do is take this, fold this down, feed it into the wheel hub, and it'll push us back up into place. Go ahead and rotate that CV axle so it fits into the splines. Now you want to be careful when you're jacking up the knuckle. You want to make sure that you're jacking up by the lower control arm portion and not the forward portion. That'll rotate the whole knuckle, causing it to bind up. So we're going to jack it right from the center section and start to lift this up. So at this point here, the vehicle itself is just starting to come up off of our lift. It's just moving a tiny bit. So that means that our suspension is completely compressed. We're going to go ahead and install one of our forward mounted bolts here. And then we can go ahead and start to manipulate everything else back into position. Let's go ahead and push this back into position, get our bolt in. And we're just going to get our nut started on the other side. Now I'm using a pry bar between the lower control arm and the knuckle itself. I'm just going to pry upward to try and manipulate this over while we pull our upper control arm down. And what we want to do is get this to line up so we can install our upper bolt. So we have the upper bolt in. Let's go ahead and get that nut threaded on there. And put our lower bolt in. Now we're going to go ahead and lower this down slowly. We want to line up our shock bolt here. Go ahead and get that started. Now at this point here, we want to go ahead and tighten everything down, but the first thing you have to do is make sure you need to jack this back up just to the point where the vehicle starts to come up off of your jack stands. Once it comes off the jack stands, that means that our suspension is in what we call a neutral ride height. That means that everything is compressed as if it had the wheel on it and it was on the ground. Now we're going to torque everything into position. If you torque everything with it all the way down and then you lower the vehicle, it pre-torques all of these bushings, causes it to bind, make for a hard ride, tears the bushings, and then you're going to end up to alignment issues and so many more problems. You must do it this way here, otherwise you're going to open up a can of worms and you don't want that to happen. I'm going to go ahead and tighten these down and then come back and torque them. Go ahead and torque down the upper control arm to knuckle bolt to 148 foot-pounds. Want to torque our lower bolt to 195 foot-pounds. If you have the ability to do so, you want to go ahead and torque the nut on the other side. We're going to torque our bolt side. Torque our shock bolt to 129 foot-pounds. Torque our trailing arm to 111 foot-pounds. Go ahead and torque our toe link to 111 foot-pounds. Go ahead and take your ABS sensor, insert that back into the wheel hub. With that in position, we'll go ahead and install the bolt. And once it bottoms out, just give it a little bit more. You just want to be snug. You're just securing the ABS sensor into the knuckle. Good, and press the ABS sensor into its brackets. Go ahead and install your end link here. Go ahead and torque this to 41 foot-pounds. And then go ahead and install our brake rotor. Now, if your vehicle utilizes the screw here to anchor it to the wheel hub, make sure that this recessed port here or hole lines up with the hole in the hub. Go ahead and install the screw. In our case here, we don't have that screw. So what we're going to do is go ahead and we're going to thread on one of our lug nuts here. This will hold the rotor into place while we install our brake caliper and bracket. I'm going to remove our caliper and bracket off of our hook there. I'm going to line this up, slide this into place. Go ahead and get your two bolts installed. You want to get both of them started by hand, get them started a few threads. Once you get these started, go ahead and snug those down with our ratchet. Go ahead and torque these down to 76 foot-pounds. Now we left a lug nut on here and we're going to put on a second one. We're going to use our large pry bar to put between the two lug nuts. The purpose of that is to keep that wheel from rotating. It'll lock up. We want to go ahead and torque down our axle nut to 258 foot-pounds. This point here, go ahead and remove your lug nuts. Once you remove the lug nuts, you can install the wheel, pump up the brakes before you drive off. You definitely want to go ahead and bring this vehicle down and get an alignment performed after any of these suspension components have been removed. You want to go ahead and get things all adjusted so you don't end up with premature tire wear or component wear. Go ahead and install that wheel. We'll go ahead and start all of our lug nuts by hand. Once we get all of these started by hand, we'll then follow up by snugging them down. Torque the wheel to 100 foot-pounds.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.